So that's great. We'll, don't worry if it's a surprise to you or, I was just sharing. We're happy to give you the feedback. The volunteer presenters were really grateful for you participating. And so after the seminar, we plan to touch base with you and give you more feedback outside if you like. So please let us know either now or after. I'm working on this and we'll be happy to help you. Is that okay? Great. And then after we work with the volunteer, we're going to do exercises with the whole group. We didn't get to that last time, and it's a commitment that I want to make to you. Standing up here, my authority is dependent upon me getting to that, us getting to that. So we have to get going, make up a little bit of time. Does that sound good? So I think we'll just dive in. Is everything good with the video? Excellent. Michael, do you want to kick us off? Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my ongoing work and specifically how I've developed a model of control of salmonella infection and how the coordination between CD4 T cells and macrophages is really critical for the control of this infection. Now, a little background on CD4 T cells. Many of you are familiar with this slide and the various panoply of functions that CD4 T cells have, but I want to focus in on the helper functions of CD4 T cells and how that really is their kind of essential function within the context of an immune response. CD4 T cells, once they differentiate and undergo cell division and activation, they can become one of several different flavors. And what's critical here is that this differentiation really imparts a specific function to the CD4 T cell and affects the outcome of the immune response. For example, if a CD4 T cell in the context of priming sees interleukin 6 and IL-21, becomes a BCL6 positive T follicular helper cell, goes on to help B cells to generate high affinity antibodies. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus in on Th1 cells and how after they see IL-12 become Th1 cells, they go out, they seek monocytes and macrophages, and their ultimate goal is to result in phagosomal pathogen control. So when a Th1 cell, or a helper CD4 T cell that is a Tbet expressing Th1 cell, sees an infected monocyte macrophage, this cell exerts a number of effector functions, including the production of interferon gamma, and these have a very critical role in controlling intracellular infections. And when you remove the ability of a CD4 T cell to interact with a macrophage, you remove the CD4 T cell entirely, as is in the case of HIV/AIDS, or if you somehow ablate the macrophage, the host becomes susceptible to a panel of different infections. And these include bacteria like M. tuberculosis and Salmonella enterica, which I'll focus on for this talk, fungi like Cryptococcus neoformans, protozoan parasites like Toxoplasma and Leishmania, and large double-stranded DNA viruses that have evolved a mechanism to avoid control by the class 1 or traditional pathway. So the question that I want to address here is how do salmonella-specific CD4 T cells cooperate with these macrophage cells to control a salmonella infection? Salmonella is an interesting pathogen where once it's ingested by the host organism, it grows exponentially and then reaches a plateau phase, but it's never cleared by the host organism. It persists for the lifetime of the animal. So in order to address this question, we developed this reporter strain, which I'm calling Salmonella D. tomato, where we took the coding sequence of the fluorescent protein D. tomato and inserted it directly into the Salmonella chromosome under control of a gene that's expressed very highly during chronic infection. And from these flow cytometry plots, we can see that when you stain with the lipopolysaccharide LPS from Salmonella, you get a strong signal in wild-type infected macrophages with no tomato signal. But when you use our reporter strain, you get this nice increase in red fluorescence. And you can see a micrograph here. This is a macrophage from an infected mouse. You can see the characteristic red bacillus, the nuclei of the macrophage is in blue. So we have a strain that we can use via flow cytometry or immunofluorescence to detect the Salmonella bacteria inside infected cells. Our first experiment was to look inside an infected animal. This is 42 days after infection, so during a chronic time point. And we get a nice separation of signal when we look at Salmonella, and this is just autofluorescence over here. We can see that they're well separated out. This is the population in total, and we're looking at the markers Li6G and CD64, which separate out monocytes, macrophages, and neutrophils here. And you can see that the the infected cell population mirrors the total population somewhat, but there is a preferential increase of infected cells in the macrophage compartment as opposed to neutrophils, which seem to predominate the total population. And then when we break this down even further and look at the markers CD64 and MERTK to separate these cells out into monocytes and macrophages, macrophages being MERTK positive, monocytes being Li6C positive, we find that the cells, the bacteria, are preferentially in macrophages. Now, we wanted to see what the context of the infection was in vivo. So we know that macrophages are infected, but what are these macrophages doing? How does the infection modify macrophage behavior and lead to a paradigm that could really explain how the CD4 T cells control it, yet not sterilize the host? So we looked at a number of different markers in the tissue, and we found the most interesting patterns arise when we looked at the nitric oxide synthase, which is an interferon gamma inducible gene, and CXCL9, another interferon gamma inducible gene. We saw that the bacteria, and you may be able to see it here, I should have blown this up for you guys, but there is a bacteria here. There's also one over here, a red bacteria here. But we found, interestingly, we found the bacteria kind of nestled in these iNOS clusters in the middle when we looked in wild-type animals. And surrounding this, we found a cuff of this chemokine CXCL9. We looked for, it's very closely related to CXCL10. We found these both in this cuff surrounding the iNOS clusters. And these were found mainly in these F480 red pulp cords in the spleen. These are, this is B220 here, staining for B cell follicles. And these clusters don't seem to be in the B cell follicles. They seem to be in the macrophage-rich areas of the spleen. And this is the common feature is that they're surrounded by this cuff of chemoattractants, which could explain how T cells are interacting with them. Now we wanted to see how CD4 T cells, the presence of CD4 T cells, or the absence of CD4 T cells would affect this infection. And we back-crossed MHC class 2 knockout mice, which are unable to form a CD4 T cell, an appropriate CD4 T cell response, and infected them with these bacteria. We saw that the MHC class 2 knockouts, they died at a very rapid clip. At around day 20, they started to decline, whereas the wild-type mice survived out indefinitely. And when we looked at day 30, in a cohort of wild-type and MHC class 2 knockout mice, we saw a very significant increase in the number of bacteria. When we looked in the tissue, what we found was kind of surprising, was the opposite of what we expected. We expected that the CD4 T cells were giving rise to these iNOS structures, but in fact, we saw that there were even more of these iNOS structures represented in green here, surrounded by the CXCL9 and 10, in the MHC class 2 knockout mice, and there were fewer of these structures. So we wanted to see where the bacteria was in relationship to these different structures, and we compared the wild type and the MHC class 2 knockout head to head. What we found was an enrichment of bacteria within the CXCL9 and 10 areas in the MHC class II knockout mice. And the opposite pattern was observed in the INOS clusters, where in the wild type mice you saw more preferentially in the INOS clusters. This indicated to us that the CD4 T cells were preferentially sterilizing the CXCL9 and 10 areas. We then looked at the T cells themselves. This is a tetramer for lipid A, which is an antigen that's expressed during salmonella infection. We see that there's a very large, robust population of tetramer-specific CD4 T cells. This is CD44, indicating antigen experience. And then when we look at the ligands for, the receptor for the ligands CXCL9 and CXCL10, these cells were highly positive for that receptor. Our next experiment was to go ahead and block the ability of these T cells to see their ligand by using a monoclonal antibody. And when we did that, we see here with no T cells, no control antibody, and no blockading antibody, you get a very high bacterial burden. You add memory CD4 T cells to this mouse, the bacterial burden is controlled significantly. And if you block CXCR3, that that control is at least partially released, indicating that this loop, this feedback loop, is important for CD4 T cell mediated control of these bacterial clusters. So in closing, I wanted to present you guys with this model where you have an infection, the bacteria represented here in red. The infection, through a number of mechanisms that we don't entirely understand, leads to the development of CXCL9 and 10 and INOS. We think this is happening through an innate mechanism that's not driven by CD4 T cells, as evidenced by the MHC class II knockout data. These structures can form fine, they're just not able to control. And this chemokine gradient draws in CD4 T cells, preferentially to the infected cells. The CD4 T cells then, through another mechanism which we don't entirely understand yet, leads to the resolution of bacteria in the CXCL9 and 10 areas. And in completing that feedback loop, leads to a diminution of the CXCL9 and 10 signal, and then a reduction in the cells that are positive for the CXCL9 and 10. Now what's interesting is that the bacteria appear to persist in these INOS clusters for the lifetime of the animal, and we're currently trying to evaluate why these structures shrink down, but they're never entirely cleared. And okay, that's it. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
That's great, Michael. Thanks a lot.
So what we'd like to do is get some general audience feedback. It doesn't necessarily have to be on our topic of authority today. There was a lot of really great things in that presentation that I think are worth commenting on, but I want you to lead the comments. Well, hello and welcome. Are you doing okay?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm here to be distracted.
Well, we will be as distracting as possible. Okay. So, any general comments? What was something that you thought was really effective in this presentation?
I thought the slides were terrific.
I
Clearly, you put a lot of work in it.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like it when it's simple, but
Right.
it's
Agreed.
understandable.
Probably one
To
of the
make
most,
all this,
yeah,
it's a lot of thought.
very striking, incredible, and you should be highly complimented and encouraged. That's amazing. A layperson can draw some inferences that you're intending without any of the technical. It's great. Anyone else? Yes.
I could tell, I think, that you were trying to avoid saying and trying to pause instead. And I only noticed because of something that we've been talking about, and I think it was very effective.
Great.
Oh, it was effective. Okay.
yeah, I mean-
didn't feel that way. Thank you.
Like, there was a pause, but it wasn't like
Good.
awkward or hard to follow, so.
Good. Good. Anyone else? Things that you? Yes.
Oh, I really like the tone the tone of his voice was like very constant, and I could hear really well for the entire time.
Very clear, very warm tone, very conversational. I agree. Very good, yes.
Pacing was good.
Yeah.
Often when a number of us get up there, we tend to talk really fast,
Fast,
and
yes.
I stay like slow and steady. And
Great, wonderful.
The summary slide is amazing. It's
It
the
is.
first time that I see a summary slide with a figure rather than like
No words.
a full
Yeah.
page,
Yeah.
basically. And you get to the summary and you're like, oh, okay, here we go, he's done. And you check out. And here instead, you get to the summary, it's like,
Yeah.
wait, what's going on?
Right,
and
right, right.
so I thought it's brilliant, and
Yeah.
I think I'll try to use it.
I really appreciate that because I spent a lot of time on this. So
It shows, and
that really makes me happy. Thank you.
it's worth the effort. I can't agree more. Quickly, some things that you thought were, Michael could improve upon when it comes to authority. What are some things that would help Michael increase his authority? There's so many good things. The graphics, the pacing, the conversational are all helping. But is there anything that you noticed? Yes.
I only noticed one more thing. It's normally when he spoke, he looked down, but occasionally when you looked up, it was like even that much better. But it just seemed like most of the time you were kind of looking down in front of you. And
Great.
you know,
Focus.
About the thing, you kind of said a couple times in the beginning, but then for the rest of it, you were amazing.
Great.
You were just like steady the whole time, and so I thought it was really good.
Okay. So in general, to summarize, the speaker focus when it's down is less authoritative than when it's up with the audience. Okay, great. That's solidly within what we understand. And what I want to do is I want to invite Brian to actually work with Michael. He's the movement and focus expert, and so I want to benefit from his presence here today. So that's what we're going to hand off in a little bit. Yes.
Just related to that, I think a lot of the looking down was sort of at the beginning of slides when you were still trying to figure out exactly what you were going to say, and then once you kind of had it figured out, then you would look around and sort of make eye contact with people. So I think if you just, that one little part is where the problem is.
That's a really good point. And as a new slide comes up, or as we move into a new thought, as you shared that you're working on transitions, that's a key area for us as an audience. We want to know what's going on, and where it's most difficult to maintain eye contact and not have fillers, that's where we need it the most. And so a tip is really work on those transitions, which you've pointed out and you already are, so that's great. And we'll talk about, maybe Brian will brainstorm about some ways to help him with that. Anyone else on some things? So some fillers, some focus, anything else that, yes?
some of the slides had gray lighting on a white background that were hard. So if you see those, I would definitely turn them.
Yeah. Almost looked like they were going to be highlighted because you were so adept with it. I thought they were.
I did have that. It didn't carry over.
There you go.
I think in an earlier version of that slide, I had multiple points and I was highlighting them as I would talk about them.
Okay.
But I only had one because it was a short talk and I didn't.
Okay, great. Addressed.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes,
I
Alex.
don't know how critical it is, but the proportion of time spent you're looking at the slides versus looking at the audience could be tilted a bit toward the audience.
Yeah,
I definitely have a problem with that. I know that.
Well,
it's a natural tendency, and I think that, so what I'd love, Brian, and I don't mean to throw it over to you, and you can certainly, the things that I noted down were very similar. I can speak to them, but Brian, you're welcome to. Fillers generally undercut, give the possible impression you're hesitant or uncertain. And so anything that we can do to reduce those, and I was so glad to hear that they were at the beginning, which there is a natural nerves, not necessarily uncertainty, but you're struggling to focus. But what I would love to get Brian's input on as a movement person is this idea of audience focus, eye contact, which you pointed out, and then also the tension between I'm talking about this and I want to talk to the audience. So that's critical, and that's a constant struggle that you all have because you're talking about things that are up there, and so it's difficult physically. And then some other physical things, and I'll leave it open, but I saw just whether there's anything from a posture standpoint that Michael might be able to. It's so we're not really. It's not something you hear a lot in comments to speakers. His posture was bad, but overall, if someone comes up and they're like this, I mean, they can give a great talk. But if they were to focus on that and they come out like this, everyone's like, wow, he was good. don't know why, really good, really certain, really strong up there. And it has to do with some of that Brian may be able to speak to. And just to let you know a little of what we'd like to do, maybe Brian can, if you can work with him for about 10 minutes, and then we'll work, I have an exercise I want to start, and then we'll continue on at the end for another 10 minutes, and we're going to start our next speaker around 1:45, and then we'll repeat the process over again. Is that okay? All right, Brian, is that okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thanks, man.
Excellent work. Mike or Michael, what do you prefer?
It's up to you.
Okay, Mike.
Mike is good.
Yeah, really fantastic. And I think that a lot of the comments that we heard just now really speak to what I was going to address myself anyway. So let's start out right off the bat by talking about eye contact. That was one of the first things I noticed. Now, interestingly, I was watching you when you were having conversations, getting feedback from people. And obviously, right now, you have no problem making eye contact. Some people do, and that's something we work with as well. And so what I'm wondering is, what happens, what is going on in your head when you're delivering information with which you're extremely comfortable and familiar, and you turn out to the audience? Are you aware of what's going on? Are you thinking very much about the words? Are you?
Yeah, it's kind of like when I turn away, I'm kind of like organizing things. It's a kind of a tick, you know.
Okay.
I haven't completely got everything organized, and then once everything kind of falls into place, then I feel like I can turn and talk. But that's
Okay.
that's what I think is going on in my head.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would buy that. I'll buy that. I'll buy part of it. And when you turn to the audience and you have a downward cast gaze, are you aware of that? Are you aware that you're not lifted here?
No, I'm not.
Okay. All right. So first thing I want to do is just make you aware of that. Second, because I think it's going to be fairly easy to overcome because you are already so organized. But the truth is, a downward gaze is very common when you're thinking. And Rodin's sculpture, The Thinker, if you're familiar with it, the seated person like this. I mean, it's a natural thing. We do this, or sometimes we'll look up when we're searching for information, right? And the fact that you had so few disfluencies in your speech, and that you just, as people were saying, you moved so fluidly through it, indicates to me that you don't need a lot of organization. And that I wanted to redirect some of your cognitive capacity in the moment to actually addressing the people out here. All right? So let's just do this. Can you don't have a script, I assume?
No.
Okay, let's do this. Let's take it back to the point when you first focused down into the was it TH1 cells? Yeah, into the TH1 cells. It was early on. You had a early slide.
This guy?
Next one, the next slide. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so let's just start talking here, okay? Because this starts to get to your main focus of the talk, right?
Okay.
All right, and all I want you to do is just start to talk about it again. And we're just going to watch a little bit, and now that you're actually aware of this, it may already eradicate any downward gaze, or it may completely blow the talk.
Okay.
Don't worry about it, though. All I'm trying to figure out is why this happens and how we can change it. All right? Just give it a shot. No judgment, except from everybody out here.
So let's see. What's the best? Okay. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus in on TH1 cells, cells that have differentiated after seeing IL-12 in the context of an immune response and have become interferon gamma producing TH1 CD4 T cells. These cells have a particular function where they go out, seek monocytes and macrophages, and engage those cells in expressing their effector functions that result in pathogen control.
Keep going, you're doing great.
Oh, Jesus.
You know this material. You know it.
And the relationship between CD4 T cells and the macrophages is particularly critical when this relationship is interrupted. So if you prevent CD4 T cells from interacting with monocytes and macrophages, if you eliminate CD4 T cells entirely, as in the case of HIV/AIDS, or if you ablate the monocytes and macrophages specifically, this results in the host becoming susceptible to a new array of pathogens.
Excellent. Good. What did you think?
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's radically different, right? All of a sudden, you were talking to us. Well done. That was a, you know what? There Actors work for years and years to be able to take adjustments that quickly. I mean, it's crazy. Literally, that's our job, is to go in every day in rehearsal, and a director or a movement director, or a choreographer will give us an adjustment, or a speech coach will give us an adjustment, and most actors do, got it, yep, okay, and they do exactly the same thing they just did. And this, if actors could do this quickly, that would be fantastic. How did it feel?
Are you hiring?
I am. Yeah. Yes. Are you? So, what did it feel like when you were doing that?
It felt good. Yeah. I really kind of just, instead of, I guess, you know, before I said I was kind of organizing, I'm also kind of, there's that kind of, you know, thing in the back of my mind, is, does this make sense? Is anybody going to care? So I kind of tried to let go of some of that and just
The second
focus.
time around.
The second time around,
Yeah.
just focus on the audience.
Great. I mean, here's the thing.
It also helped that everyone was so nice. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, typically they are. On a one-to-one basis. You get into a crowd and it's a mess. But yeah, go ahead.
I did notice that you kind of kept glancing at the screen, and I didn't know if that was why you felt like you needed to do that, or like you were kind of using your laser pointer at
The
first.
second time?
The second, yeah, just
Yeah.
Yeah, now, I guess I felt like I needed to do that for emphasis at certain points, but I don't know, what do you think? Is it necessary, or?
I have a thought, and go ahead.
I have a thought on this too.
Go
So
ahead.
at least when I'm giving talks, sometimes when I'm looking at people's faces, in addition to trying to talk about the information I'm trying to talk about, or data or whatever, I then catch a glance of someone's face, and I'm also kind of like, well, what are they thinking? Or like I'm thinking about their reaction to my work, which kind of overloads me a little bit. And so maybe if you have any techniques for how to, I don't know, it's hard to look at someone's face and not care about how they're reacting, right? So then it kind of like, there's this other thing going on, and then it's a lot. So I did think, you know, maybe a couple more ums, which I know I do when I look at the audience. I have more ums because I'm like thinking about too many things. I don't know. So any thoughts on that?
That's a great point and a great question. And in fact, this is one of the big differences between live theater and the movies. In the movies, an actor gets up and they do their lines until the director says, okay, good enough. And in live theater, every time it changes because you've got somebody in the front row sleeping, and then somebody over here who's the other texting, exactly. And then you've got these people who are like, this? And sometimes you think this is fantastic, and sometimes you think, what am I doing here? I should get a job as an actor, and yes, we can hook you up. So these are all perfectly natural questions, great questions. And the truth is, really, I'm going to address, let me address that first, okay? What's your name?
Rachel.
Rachel?
Yep.
Rachel. So the point, Rachel, is that at all times you've got to be what we call present, or as you've probably heard the concept of mindfulness, yeah? It's just an awareness of your surroundings and how it affects you and how you're affecting it back, right? Which means you might make variations. You might, for instance, glance back more at the screen. If you're getting a lot of quizzical looks, you might want to double check and go, yeah, let me just redirect you to this point here. And if you get a lot of people going, yeah, then you stay with them. So it really comes to a matter of what we call reading the house. Yeah? And that's just something that happens over time. The more you get comfortable working with live audiences, the more you will feel that you can read the house, and eventually, especially because you work in typically more lit rooms where you can see people's faces, you can read people's faces and think, okay, I'm doing great here, or I better speed up, or no, so I'm giving the wrong talk, right? But one way or another, you're going to develop the capacity to read the house more and more, and that does come with practice and awareness. I want you to start, though, with the understanding that you are absolutely expert in your field. And so when you start to wonder, am I making sense here? Not to me, but that's okay. I think to everybody else here, to whatever your level of expertise is relative to Mike's field, he was making sense, right? I mean, was anybody flummoxed by what he was saying? No, okay? So trust that. You know, the theme of today is authority. You have it. You have it from years and years of doing the work that you've done. So trust that, all right? The minute you step up here, you've got authority. One of the things, I'm just going to segue right into one of the things that I really liked about you said it felt good when you had made eye contact.
Yeah.
And one of the things I noticed is that your posture actually changed. Here's the thing. I don't know, have you ever studied or heard of Alexander technique?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Who said yes? Okay, so you know that a lot of the movements in Alexander are led with the head and then the body. I don't know how much, have you studied Alexander?
Yeah, I'm at the beginning.
Okay, no worries, all good. I haven't studied Alexander, just little bits and pieces of it. But when I
going and up, you think about being opposite directions with your shoulders and that's where I am.
Yeah, great, and that's about stretch, expanding your energy. And when I teach ballroom and Latin dance, is one of the things I do. I do that as well. We're always trying to feel very expansive because it opens things up. Whether it's your lungs you're trying to open up for projection, but also the point I was getting at is that your eyes, when we walk around, our eyes lead our head and our head leads our body. This is just natural. Nobody walks down the street like this. Hey, how you doing? Just bump into poles and that sort of thing. We typically move with our eyes, which leads our head, which leads our body. And the same thing is true of our posture. If our eyes are down here, when I'm teaching people how to rollerblade or skate when they first start out, I'm always getting them to look up. Because if you look down, that's where your head goes, that's where your balance goes, that's where your energy goes. So just the fact that you started to make eye contact with people, what it did, it had this great ripple effect because it lifted your posture, and in lifting your posture, it created more space for projection, for air to enter your lungs. Really simple biomechanical processes that have an enormous impact on your audience. So I really don't think I need to do much more with that. I know we want to get into some group exercises. Just the fact that you are to start to be a bit aware of making eye contact makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And trust everything else because you've got it going on.
So another round of applause for Michael, please. So what I'd like to do now is, for the next about 10 minutes or so, I'd like you to pair up. So please, can you find someone to talk with? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out a series of tasks for you to work on in pairs. And so if you could just gently turn, because we are going to have another speaker, so don't rearrange the room entirely, but please find someone to speak with. Everyone needs to find someone to talk with. And if we have an odd number, then we'll figure it out. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be any particular, it can be
Oh, I know.
different departments, genders, doesn't matter. And you may, our next speaker, you may want, no, it's okay. Please participate. But at the end of this, you'll need to get ready. So that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Is everyone paired up? Who wants to be paired up? Pretty good. We have a group of. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, good. Oh, here. This group of three. Here we have our former speaker.
Would you mind?
Okay, this is great. And what I'd like you to do, okay, this is going to be a timed exercise. I'm going to do a series of tasks, and they're all going to be timed. So please be cognizant of the time. What I want you to do is one of the two of you raise your hand right now. Okay, if you both raise your hand, one of them put it down. Just keep your hand up. One of the two of you, keep your hand up. Okay, that person's going to go first. Okay, is that decided? Okay, good. When I say go, you will have 1 minute. And what I want you to do is explain your life's work to the other person. Okay, the other person, I want you to pay attention to them, but I don't want you to say anything. Okay, are we clear? And I want you to continue for 1 minute. And if you're done, I guess you can stop, but you only have 1 minute. Is that clear? Your life's work. So I'm trying to hint at the people who are in the room, who are experts at a certain area. I want you to share that expertise. As if someone said, so, what do you do? In a very helpful and non-sarcastic way. Does that make sense? So let's try it. Ready? On your marks, get set, go.
All right. Try to understand our body determines which T cells belong to schizophrenia and therefore these are the manufacturers to protect us versus like so nutshell, I'd say my life's work is to understand this process of T cells. No, it's better.
I don't say anything. Like I just assume.
I've had these conversations with people with
Oh, okay.
you know, even like family is one thing. Like people,
Family. They don't even ask you, right?
and you, sometimes it's just working.
And stop, please. Stop, please. So, how did that go? How did that go? Did it go well? Was it super easy? Was it hard? What were the reactions? Awkward. What was Sylvia? What was awkward about it?
It's just that it's hard. 1 minute is long.
1 minute is long. Who found? Raise your hand if you thought 1 minute was long. Raise your hand.
That took a while.
Okay. Raise your hand if you thought 1 minute was too short. Okay. Some people either way. What else made it awkward? It was a long time. So you found. So to rephrase the awkwardness, you found that you were done and you felt awkward. Continue.
No, I think that in this case it was because I was with Romel, who works for me.
It's a power
That's
struggle.
not what he does.
Okay. That makes sense. Did anyone else find their audience, the nature of the audience, particularly awkward? A little bit? It's okay. You can look at me and nod and they won't see it. Okay.
The person listening couldn't say anything back or
Yeah.
agree with them. You just really kind of stare at them but didn't know how to like encourage
Thank
them.
you.
They wouldn't feel awkward.
Thank you for sticking with that part of the exercise. Some groups had more difficulty with that. It's okay. It is. It's hard not to go off of someone else's input. It's hard to continue to feel on the spotlight, isn't it? Okay, good. Did you notice, even though they couldn't say anything, did you notice some kind of feedback? Did you, you were talking? Oh, you found it awkward not to say anything.
Well, or to like give her some feedback or to like agree.
Yeah.
So I try to nod my head a little bit.
Okay, so you did give her feedback.
I tried.
Right. But you wanted to give her more. What was something that you wanted to say?
Well, I don't know, just be like, oh, or just to show that you were interested.
Okay. And yet at the same, I want to balance this because another typical reaction is that people want to interject and they want to say something, and it's difficult often for us to not say anything.
Yeah, well, I need
So-
to learn to shut up.
That's what I'm getting at, because you were giving her feedback. You were giving her support. I saw a lot of that when I looked around. People going like this, because we're nice people in this room. We're in Minnesota, whether or not we're from Minnesota. And so you were all non-verbally like, oh yeah, well that's great. And so that's really good. But at the same time, it still was awkward because it was an exercise and it told you couldn't do something. Anyone else? What was difficult?
Kind of brought up my fault is that I'm really bad at making eye contact, and when it's like a one-on-one situation, I don't know what to do.
Were you talking or listening? I'm sorry to interrupt. Were you talking or listening?
I was listening.
You were listening, and it was hard. It was hard to watch him the whole time.
It's just like in general, even when I'm up,
Yeah.
Giving a talk, we were talking about eye contact, and it just seems to make me more nervous.
Well, especially in a heightened. Go ahead.
So my reaction to that, like what's going on in my head there is either I'm boring her to death, which I hope is not the case, but I think there are cultural differences in eye contact as well. Like Native American people who were raised in Native American culture do not make eye contact as easily. And so I want to be sensitive to understanding why that is happening. And it tells me something. I'm a clinician too, so when I see a patient not making eye contact, I get very much, I get information from that compared to
Great.
patient who basically hear it.
Good. Oh, okay, so I want to emphasize that some of the things that I heard. Eye contact is very important. There are some tails of meaning. It can mean different things, but in the middle of the bell curve, we have a general sense of engagement and connection. If eye contact is not being made, that's a sign for the speaker what's going on. Okay, so if the speaker is looking at an audience and the audience not making eye contact. Now, did you have difficulty when you're speaking making eye contact with your audience?
I tried to maintain it, and I tried to become more engaging to get her eyes back up to mine.
Okay, good. Okay, so that give and take, that's very common. Okay, so I want to, and then I want to address the difficulty of these exercises. The nature of exercises is to highlight different aspects so that they are uncomfortable, so that we can point them out, and to help you grow. And so it was awkward. I put you in an awkward situation. I apologize. I will briefly address. We will continue this exercise with the after the next speaker. A quick tip that I use is to give yourself a job. So what Brian was saying is very indicative of how we work. Is that sometimes we'll have you focus on a particular aspect and let the rest of your behavior follow that. So sometimes we give ourselves a physical job that doesn't necessarily address the core issue. So for example, your core issue was having difficulty maintaining eye contact because you didn't know where to look and you felt awkward looking at him. So if you give yourself a job to do, look at his left eye. That can help. I don't know what to do, I don't know where to look, I'm just going to look at his left eye. And that will give yourself permission to this feels dumb, but it's okay. And nobody, I believe, will say, excuse me, it's really distracting, you're looking in my left eye. I can't continue talking to you unless you look at the right one and the left one equally. It's not going to happen. We can't tell that. In fact, a lot of these techniques we use because from the audience's standpoint, they're like, dang, she is really looking at me. I must be so engaging. I'm going to continue on. So that's just an example. So when we return to the exercise, some of you might want to try this. And then if we go too far, we'll come back. Brian, please.
When it comes to addressing a crowd, sometimes you won't be able to. I mean, if you're addressing a crowd of 500 people, obviously you're not going to be able to make actual eye contact with people. But the sense that you are making eye contact with the crowd, that you're sharing the love, as it were, is equally as important. Yeah. So even a group as small as this, as long as I'm scanning the room and giving my energy out like this, I don't actually have to pause and make eye contact with any specific person. Although sometimes it may be useful to re-engage somebody, that's right. Or to get some affirmation from somebody and then move on. So don't feel like it has to be eye to eye to eye every time.
And to go off of Brian's point, and then we should move on, but this is another trick I want to share, is that some of these tips you need to take in context of what they're trying to accomplish. And that's a great point, what Brian said. Taken to its extreme, I've had clients listen to Brian's tip, and then they'll do this. So thank you everyone and welcome today. I'm so happy to be here. And so one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to be making periodic eye contact like a sprinkler. Because I'm mechanical and I'm robotic and I am artificial intelligence incarnate and will kill you. So one of the ways to marry the two, and even with the left eye trick, which can, if you adhere to it to an extreme, can seem inorganic, inauthentic, and therefore fake. So use the variability of your environment. Use someone moves. You look at them or someone else moves. And just use organic cues and go off of them, and that will make it seem organic. So if there's something about, if they move a little bit, you can switch up to the right one, for example. In a crowd, someone's laughing, you go to that, or someone's so mad at you. Every once in a while, what I do is I usually in an audience, I'll find that sleeping person, and I'll be talking to them, trying to get them to come up. But use that. Go ahead and use your environment as an opportunity to do what you're trying to do, and that is make eye contact. And it's okay if you spend some time on someone and then, someone's over here not looking at me because she's thinking about going up next, Does that make sense? So we're always going to try to balance the tips that we're giving you so that they accomplish the purpose. And so it's absolutely what Brian said, is that the effort of making eye contact with everyone is important. And if you do it in an organic way, it's even more genuine. Question?
So let's say in your mind you believe the audience is hostile.
Yeah.
So does anything of what you're telling us change?
No, here's, yes, everything changes because the audience changes, but the principle is you want eye contact. And so, let's see, you want connection with an audience no matter if they're hostile or positive. And you have to be sensitive to if you're making your audience uncomfortable. So that would be the far end. If I gave my talk and I just ignored everyone else and this one person, she would probably at some point feel very uncomfortable, wouldn't you? And so you want to be sensitive to that. So if the whole audience is uncomfortable, or hostile rather, you don't want to make them uncomfortable, but at the same time, you want to reach out to them. And you want to maybe try to connect with them on some point. And if the whole audience was hostile, you're basically offering point after point and moving on to see if you can find a point of connection. So I guess, I don't know, Brian, would you say in a hostile audience? how would you
Yeah,
handle them?
Well, I've had a lot of hostile audiences. a lot of experience dealing with this, and especially with trying to convey comedy or romance, it's tricky. And even on a one-to-one basis, I mean, we've all, maybe not all, but I know I have encountered many times hostile people face to face, or on the street, or cornered in a store in New York when I was trying to just buy. Anyway, and a lot of times what works is to assume that, once again, is about authority, assume that you are in the power position and that they're hostile because of some kind of fear or confusion. And if you let that, now this is getting a little heady here, but if you let your sense of authority assuage any malicious intent you might sense from them, it actually will soften people. So, for instance, if you have a one-on-one encounter and you treat them with the kind of kindness that you would treat a child who is upset, as opposed to the threat that you feel you need to respond to. Similarly, when you do that with a crowd, the effect can be powerful. I mean, you can put everyone at ease. If you sense that everybody's like, oh yeah, I'd love to see how your TH1 helper cell theory is working out, you're like, great, I want to show you. And ideally, you'll have some ideas maybe after this that we can talk about, right? Just having that attitude will put you at ease, but also put them at ease, which will put you more at ease, which strangely will put them more at ease. That's our point there. Yes.
So I often guest lecture for undergraduate students, and sometimes you have them like in the middle of the big lecture hall and they're texting or on their phone. Like, how do you grab their attention? Are they just lost, or like are they a lost cause, or is there a way?
So I want to address that by thanking Brian for revisiting and bringing us back to this point of authority, and I think that this bears on that, especially with hostile audiences. You need to attach your primary focus to your point, and you need to keep offering that up. And if they don't buy it, at a certain point, you have to let go of the audience. You are still reaching out to them with your point, and this is a subtle but very significant distinction. You are not depending on the audience's feedback for validation or buy-in. You are incorporating it with respect to your point. So therefore, if they don't buy one point, you're moving on to the next. If they don't buy any of them, you lay all your points out and you say, thanks a lot, these are great points, you're not buying them, I'm moving on. And that's an authority that actually will induce a lot of curiosity and charisma, which is like, dang, that guy didn't care that I was texting the whole time. I was listening with one ear, and I'm like, I'm interested. Not being a little flip, but at the same time, you have to preserve yourself. There's something that I've referred to as you prepare a lot in anticipation of the audience. Make sure that it's relevant. How am I going to reach these kids that are texting? And you think of everything, and then you stand up there. At that point, you can't care. Because if you do, it's going to spiral out, and they can sense it. Like, oh my God, I got to make this sale, or Gail needs a new set of knives. I mean, that's what happens pretty quickly. So you have to move, and I think Brian touched on this, from you're the authority. I got great stuff here, and if you show that enthusiasm and they're not buying it, you move on to the next, and the next, I'm at the end, no buyers? Well, I'm going to go home and have a big old glass of wine. I mean, and that's it. We've walked off stage and like, whoo, they're not buying it. And that's what you have to, you turn to each other, which you don't have the benefit of in the room, and you say, wow, this is tough. They're not buying what I'm selling, but that doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile. So that's all you can do at that point, but I think it's very significant so you avoid this trap of depending on them. Does that make sense? So
I think that's it. Yeah, and you know what? One thing that's always helped me, I know, I'll give you a quick story here. I went to see this guy named Charlie Bethel, who's a one-man performer. He writes these incredible epics and performs them, plays all the characters, and I've been looking forward to seeing his performance Gilgamesh for a long time. And I finally had the opportunity to see it. I was very excited. I got a seat in the front row of the theater, and I sat down, and 5 minutes into the show, I was asleep. I had just been dead tired. It was a horrible week for me. There was nothing I could do, and physiologically, I shut down. It was a comfortable seat. It was a warm house. It was giving the performance of a lifetime, and I fell asleep. So sometimes, like Chris said, you can't worry about every person out there. God knows, maybe an emergency text from, Mom, lock yourself out of the house again. Okay, the hidden key is under the rock, right? So really just divorce yourself from that. And like Chris said, attach yourself really focus on your authority, because you can't control other people. You can just give them what you got and bring them in as best you can.
And that kind of sympathetic imagination that's wonderful. And I heard a story, someone on the subway and they're with their kids and they're all running over and bugging everyone and just, and finally somebody snaps and says, "Excuse me, will you control your kids?" And the guy says, "Yeah, I'm sorry, they just lost their mom and I'm having a little hard time." Like, just, oh my God, I feel awful. And so that's probably overly dramatic, but at the same time, trying to exercise, like, oh wow, these kids are really addicted to their phones, and this is really sad, and you're gonna grow up deprived and like, oh wow. So anyway, so what I'd like to do, and this is so hard. How do you pronounce your first name? Alessia. It's always tough to have us talk about a lot of things and then like, okay, now our next person is going to be completely self-conscious about all the things we've done. So please, I told her to do her best just to try whatever it is, and we'll do a brief amount and then revisit that. And then we'll look for your feedback. So keep those things in mind as you listen, and we'll do it again. Thank you, Elisa.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Alessia Stornetta, and I'm a postdoctoral associate in the laboratory of Silvia Balbo. Today I would like to talk to you about DNA analysis strategies for biomarkers of anti-cancer prodrug action. DNA damaging agents such as nitrogen mustards or platinum-based compounds have been used in cancer chemotherapy for more than 60 years. Their main mechanism of toxicity is induction of DNA modification, which can interfere with transcription and DNA replication and eventually lead to cell death. These modifications can be in the form of a monoadduct or in the form of a cross-link. And a cross-link can be intra or interstrand depending on whether it's formed in the same strand of the DNA or in the opposite strands. A problem with cancer chemotherapy with this class of compounds is selectivity. In fact, these compounds are not able to target cancer cells only, but they also damage the DNA of non-targeted cells. Therefore, a strategy to improve the selectivity of this class of compound would be to develop new drugs that can selectively be activated by conditions present in cancer cells, but not in non-cancerous cells. Hypoxia is a state of low oxygen concentration and is a characteristic of tumor cells, especially solid tumors. And so a strategy to improve the selectivity of this class of compounds would be to develop hypoxia-activated prodrugs. So a prodrug is a biological inactive compound that can be activated, can be metabolized to reactive drug. And so in the case of hypoxia-activated prodrug, you have your prodrug gets reduced through one electron reduction, and there is the formation of this free radical intermediate. Now, there is then a further reduction to the reactive drug. So in oxygenated cells, this free radical intermediate is inhibited by the presence of oxygen, which takes the radical, and the prodrug gets back to the inactive state. An example of a recently developed hypoxia-activated prodrug is the nitrogen mustard PR104A. PR104A is administered as its phosphate ester, and then it gets rapidly hydrolyzed to its corresponding alcohol PR104A. Then this compound undergoes reduction to two main metabolites that are cytotoxins and are the hydroxylamine PR104H and diamine PR104N. It has also recently found that this compound can be activated in a 2-electron reduction by the aldocator reductase AKR1C3 in a reaction that doesn't imply the formation of the oxygen sensitive intermediate, and therefore this reaction can happen in all the cells in which AKR1C3 is active and expressed. Therefore, these new findings led to the investigation of this compound in the treatment of acute leukemia. Mainly due to the finding that there was high AKR1C3 expression in some blasts of some acute myeloid leukemia patients. They found high activity of PR104 in AML and acute lymphoblastic leukemia xenograft models. And also they found hypoxia in the bone marrow microenvironment. This hypothesis was tested in a recent clinical study in AML and ALL patients, and the main goal of this study was to test the efficacy of PR104 for the treatment of acute leukemia, but also to evaluate the use of two biomarkers, the enzyme AKR1C3, to evaluate the role of the enzyme AKR1C3 and hypoxia as predictive biomarkers of drug for predicting the efficacy of this compound in leukemia patients. Results from these studies showed some measurable activity, especially in those patients that received the highest amount of the drug. However, there were some treatment-related adverse effects that led to the discontinuation of this clinical study. And also another result was that hypoxia and AKR1C3 alone cannot be used as biomarkers of efficacy. Therefore, the main conclusion of that study were that PR104 should be used just in case of risk of relapse, in case of non-responsive cancers, so in case the available therapies are not working, or in combination with other drugs. As well, another conclusion was that there is a need of better predictive biomarkers of susceptibility for these patients. So our question was, can we use the DNA adducts induced by this compound to predict the efficacy? And this brings me to the goal of the project, which was the study of the DNA adducts induced by PR104A in biological samples. And to study the DNA adducts, we had to develop liquid chromatography mass spectrometry methods for the screening and characterization of the adduct, as well as for the quantitation. Should I go on, or?
That's fine. Thank you. It's fine. That's fine. Applause, please. No, it's great. It's great. Thank you so much. And I know it's hard to volunteer, and it's especially hard to do it under the informed scrutiny of an audience. You did a great job. Thank you very much. And so what I'd like to do is get some audience feedback, some things that you thought were effective, and there were lots of them. You did a very good job. And some things that might help Alicia, is that right? Increase her authority or shape it in a constructive way. So things that went well. What are some things? Go ahead.
She had really great eye contact.
Wonderful eye contact.
No, it wasn't the
No,
automaton.
no, it wasn't at all. And I will say that in addition to the eye contact, a wonderful smile. And there's nothing in any requirement of a paper presentation where someone has to smile, but as a human, on a deep level, it's probably one of the greatest things. Like, you can smile at me all day, I'll just like, yep, sounds good, as opposed to someone who's trying to focus, and that's very natural, so that's wonderful. It's a wonderful reaction. Yes, Mike?
I thought she had really good pacing.
Yeah.
Throughout, it was kind of
Very clear.
steady, very clear. Yeah.
Very clear. I noted that as well. So incredibly clear. And just a brief note on accents. They're very interesting to our ears. I often have English speakers. Is English your first language?
No.
Okay. Well, and that's very common to have heavily accented English is very interesting to listen to. So even when it's difficult to understand, it's still interesting to me. Some people might not find it, if it's unintelligible, then it's a little difficult, but even then it's interesting because I'm trying to figure it out. So in general, people who are speaking English as a second language are more concerned about it than an audience, is what I want to say. But you were particularly clear. So the increased effort that you give or were giving came across quite clearly. Anything else? Yes?
She was talking about complex topics, and ones that I'm not necessarily familiar with, and I understood them by the time she was finished explaining.
Great. Great content delivered. Wonderful. Yes?
That's basically what I was going to
Good.
say. Nice, clear slides. I don't know
Good.
anything about this topic, so I understood it, which is good.
Great. So things that you noticed that we could help her increase her authority. That's our topic today. Yes?
So I only noticed this because I
Sure.
myself have been told to
Yeah.
fix this a little bit, but you said sorry twice.
Oh.
And so what was suggested to me is instead say rather or alternatively. It just sounds a little more, because everyone misspeaks. I think you
Sure.
said something and then you said sorry, what I meant to say was blah, blah, blah. You know?
I see.
And instead say, you know, you misspeak and then you say, oh, rather, and then re-say it.
Yeah,
And that
okay.
just sounds a little bit more, because you're not sorry, you didn't do anything wrong, right? And so you gotta like kind of.
Interesting. And that's a good point because the word sorry diminishes authority more than an alternative phrasing. What, in other words, or let me rephrase that.
And I'm not sure a lot of other people really recognize it. I do, because I do it a lot. So I've been working on it.
You hear it, even professional radio announcers will misspeak sometimes, and NPR, you'll hear this. And exactly, a lot of times they'll say, the economy, rather economy, has plummeted this week, you know. So it's a great suggestion.
It's a good point, and it's a subtle point, but I think it's helpful, definitely helpful. So that's something to keep in mind. Anyone else?
You know, Chris, go ahead.
I thought your basic idea that you could take advantage of the hypoxic environment to convert the prodrug into the real drug was actually a really clever and neat idea. I suspect that is the big idea of the project, and so I would have been really emphasizing that a little more.
Great.
Here's amongst this list of stuff, here's the big idea.
Great.
And a little, in terms of authority, you know, take a little bit of a stand there to get people's attention.
Thank you for saying that. So from a content standpoint, we tend to be excited about our ideas and sometimes don't have as much confidence in some of these things. And so an outside ear saying, wow, that was really interesting, and then to really commit to that and hold that out and say, you know what, this is the main point. There are other really interesting points. Any feedback on that?
I mean, yes, on the comment, but I just I don't want people to think that the use of hypoxia for like, it was not my idea, like it has been like it's an idea that has been going on for like a lot of years. It's not that like my project, I came up with like using hypoxia, like targeting hypoxia. It's
Okay, so let me rephrase then. It would helpful to me to see the big idea highlighted somewhere.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff, but
Maybe
this is
then,
the good stuff right here.
Right.
Wake up.
Yeah, I feel like the idea in for my project is this one. It's like this would be the idea, like
Good.
to use the.
I have a question with this.
Yes.
Which, it's something that I also have faced and I'm not really sure how to tackle. So there's a cultural component maybe, and then also something else, I guess, which is how we perceive our work. In my training, I was told that you never present things saying, I did this, I did that. But I'm coming from Italy, and you don't put yourself first. You don't sell yourself. You're just part of a group, and whatever you do is a group effort.
Okay.
So now, because of that, I always present things as we are doing.
Sure.
And I gave a presentation, and I mean, it was part of what you've seen last time. And I was told after as a feedback, you know what, it didn't really come across what you did compared to what other people did. And so it kind of resonates with this comment where you're trying to sell it, but you don't want to say that it's all yours. But so it's kind of like how do we present that, and how do we sell it as something that we are putting an input in, but is
that, because
Right.
I didn't, I mean, if I'm talking,
Right.
I didn't do it with the
Sure.
postdoc in my lab, or
Yep.
the research assistant, so I think they use it for me here.
Sure.
You know, she's more inclined to the ODI when she talks about the work she
Sure.
did, as opposed to the field.
I think that's relevant, and I want to call out, and I think Brian wants to clarify as well. This is a very significant issue, this I and we, and this phrasing, and I want to speak to that in terms of the speaker-audience dynamic. And then there's a larger dynamic about credit and perception of ego that's very relevant. Mark's point is also very relevant, and that is highlighting the single takeaway. From a cognitive load, if you give me 5 things, I'm going to be taxed to recall them all. As opposed to, there are 5 points, but this one is the one we want you to remember. So